The rain hammered against the pavement, its cold fingers tracing the grooves of a cracked sidewalk. In the middle of the downpour, a lone figure sat under the harsh yellow glow of a street lamp. His fur, matted and soaked, clung to his ribs like the weight of a forgotten past. The world around him was a blur, both distant and untouchable, as the city's constant hum became a soft murmur in the back of his mind. His name was Charlie, a stray with no home, no family, only the echo of his own lonely heartbeat. And yet here he was, watching. He had been here for days, in the same spot, his brown eyes fixated on the door of the house in front of him. He hadn't eaten much, the scraps from passing pedestrians hardly enough to sustain him. But he didn't care. He wasn't here for food. He wasn't here for warmth. He was here for something else. Behind that door a child lived, a small girl who, over the last week, had caught Charlie's attention like no one else. She had taken pity on him one afternoon, offering him a scrap of food as she stood at that same door. He had never known the kindness of a human before, let alone the tender touch of a small hand. But that was before the noises started. Screams, arguments, the crashing of furniture. And now Charlie couldn't leave. He couldn't walk away. Not when he knew what was waiting for him behind that door. Something had to change. Charlie's days were spent between the same few paces, circling the house in a restless, determined orbit. His eyes never strayed far from that door, even as the days grew colder and his paws grew raw against the harsh pavement. A week had passed since the first sound of the struggle, since the screams. Each time the girl's voice rose in fear, each time the door slammed shut, Charlie's heart twisted into a tighter knot. He had been astray long enough to know pain, but he had never known the pain of a child, the helplessness, the vulnerability in the sound of a sob too raw for words. As the sun dipped behind the buildings and the sky painted itself in shades of violet, he could hear it again, the unmistakable sound of breaking glass followed by a muffled scream. His body tensed. It wasn't just fear now, it was something deeper, something primal. He padded closer to the door, his claws clicking against the wet concrete, his breath quickening in the cold. His heart hammered in his chest, not from fear but from an unfamiliar pull that urged him forward. He couldn't leave. Not now. The girl was waiting for him, he could feel it. The nights grew longer, the rain more relentless, but Charlie never moved. Not even when the cold became unbearable. Not even when his body screamed for rest. He lay against the door, his body shivering as the wind cut through his fur like knives. But still, his eyes never left the small window above the door. Inside, the house was silent for a long time. The violence had stopped. But Charlie could still hear the faint echoes of brokenness, like the remnants of a storm that had passed but left its marks behind. The girl's footsteps were no longer light and carefree, they were slow, hesitant. Charlie knew she was still inside, waiting. He could sense it in the air, in the subtle tension that clung to the night. He wanted to bark, to alert her that he was there, that she wasn't alone. But he knew it wasn't time yet. The days turned into weeks. And still, he sat, guarding, his body weakened, but his resolve grew stronger. He was no longer a stray dog, he was her protector now. It was only a matter of time before something would change. It happened on a crisp morning, the kind where the air stung your lungs, but still carried the promise of warmth. The silence in the house had stretched too long and Charlie's patience had thinned. Something was wrong. The girl hadn't come out in days. Not for food, not for water. Charlie's instincts screamed at him, and with every fiber of his being, he knew that he couldn't wait anymore. He rose to his feet, his muscles stiff from days of lying still. The door remained closed, the faint sound of muffled cries coming from within. Without thinking, he threw his body against the door, the force of his impact sending a shudder through the wood. The door didn't budge. Charlie barked, desperation seeping into the sound. He was not a dog. He was a protector, and nothing would stop him. But the door stayed closed. Charlie's mind raced, his eyes darting around for a way in. His paws scraped against the concrete as he scrambled to find an opening, any weakness in the door. And then, through the slivers of light between the door's edges, he saw it, her face pale and streaked with tears, her small hands pressed against the glass. Charlie's heart broke, but he didn't hesitate. He rammed into the door again, this time harder, determined. The door cracked. The door flew open with a loud snap, and Charlie charged inside, his nose trailing the air, his senses alive with urgency. There, in the corner of the dimly lit room, was the girl. Her small body huddled against the wall, her eyes wide with terror, her hands shaking. The room was a mess. Furniture overturned, broken glass scattered across the floor, and the scent of fear hung thick in the air. Charlie didn't hesitate. He ran to her side, his warm, trembling body brushing against her leg. The girl's eyes widened in shock, but then she reached down, her small hand trembling as it rested on his fur. It was a touch of reassurance. Charlie sat beside her, his body pressed close to hers, offering the only warmth he had left. Her sobs began to quiet, her body relaxing as she leaned into him. For the first time in days, the silence in the house wasn't filled with violence. It was filled with the sound of a girl and a dog, both broken but together. The days that followed were filled with small moments of healing, slow but steady. The girl's cries grew fewer, replaced by soft whispers, the gentle touch of her hand on Charlie's fur as they sat together, watching the rain fall outside. The world hadn't changed, not yet. But there was a new peace between them, a bond unspoken but clear, that neither of them would ever be alone again. Charlie had found his place, guarding not just the door but her heart. And she had found the courage to face the world again, not with fear, but with strength. Charlie's body was still weary, his legs still stiff from the days he spent guarding that door. But in the girl's eyes, he saw something more than just gratitude. He saw love, quiet and steadfast, like the bond between a mother and child. And as the sun broke through the clouds, painting the world in golden light, Charlie knew one thing for sure. He had found a home, forever. As the days passed, the warmth between Charlie and the girl grew into something more solid, more real. She would wake early, her feet patting softly against the cold wooden floor, and Charlie would be there, waiting, as if he knew every step she took. The house was quieter now, but it wasn't peaceful. The stillness was a quiet aftershock, one that didn't fully leave the walls. At night, when the lights flickered and the wind howled through the cracks in the window, Charlie would still sit at the foot of the girl's bed. He wasn't just guarding the door anymore. He was guarding her, protecting her from the unseen, from the shadows that lingered in the corners of the room, the ones that still haunted her. The girl would wake sometimes, her breathing shallow, her body drenched in cold sweat. She didn't speak, not at first, but Charlie could feel it. The tremors running through her, the memories of what she'd endured. They haunted her even in the light of day, and though Charlie had no words to offer, he had something more precious, his presence. He would nudge her gently with his nose, offering comfort in the only way he knew. He could feel her hesitate at first, her small hands shaking as she reached for him, as if unsure whether she was allowed to be vulnerable again. But slowly, she started to relax. Her fingers dug into his fur, pressing him closer, and in that simple touch, she found the courage to speak the things she hadn't said aloud. "I'm scared," she whispered one night, her voice barely audible as the room shuddered with the echoes of distant thunder. Charlie's eyes softened. He didn't need to understand the words. He could hear it in her breath, in the trembling of her chest. It was the same fear he had felt when he first saw her at the door, small, broken, unsure. He nuzzled her hand, pressing against her with all the gentleness he could muster. He would never leave her. He would never let anything hurt her again. But not everything could be healed with a touch. The wounds that cut the deepest were not always the ones visible to the eye. The girl's nights became darker, filled with dreams that twisted her mind in ways that even Charlie couldn't chase away. Sometimes she would cry out in her sleep, her small body jerking beneath the covers. Charlie would wake, his heart racing as he heard the familiar sounds, the muffled sobs, the broken whispers of a child too young to carry such a heavy load. He would nudge her, whine softly in her ear, but it didn't stop. The storms within her continued, relentless. One night, as the girl woke in a panic, her hands flying to her throat as if the very air was suffocating her, Charlie's instinct kicked in. He barked, sharp and clear, his voice cutting through the silence. Her eyes snapped open, her breath ragged, But when she saw him there sitting beside her, his brown eyes filled with nothing but loyalty, something shifted in her. It wasn't enough to just be there anymore. He needed to show her she was safe, that the world wasn't as dark as it felt. With his eyes fixed on her, Charlie made a choice. The girl, still gasping for breath, reached out to him. Her hand found his fur, and in that moment, it was as if her mind had finally found an anchor. She pulled herself up, leaning into his warmth, and, slowly, the panic began to fade. Charlie watched her, understanding the depth of her struggle. The world around them remained uncertain, chaotic. But here, in this room, he was the calm, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to be held. The days that followed were different. There was still fear, still the weight of what had happened to her, but there was also healing. The girl would no longer sit alone, lost in her thoughts, her eyes distant and vacant. She had begun to open up to Charlie, telling him stories, sometimes incoherent, other times simply about things she saw outside the window or things she remembered from when life had been better. Charlie would listen, his ears twitching with each word. He couldn't understand everything, but he understood enough. She was starting to reclaim her world. And it wasn't just the girl who was healing. Charlie had been guarding the door for days, for weeks, but now he found himself trusting again too. When the weather cleared, and the first signs of spring began to creep in, he started to walk around the yard. The world wasn't as frightening as it once had been. He wasn't running from memories or chasing shadows. He was just living. And for the first time in his life, he was part of something real, something permanent. The door that once separated them, her inside, him on the outside, had finally been opened. It wasn't just a door anymore. It was a threshold to a new life. One morning, the girl stood at the door, her eyes bright and full of wonder as she stepped outside, the sun casting a warm glow across her face. Charlie stood beside her, his tail wagging lightly. It was the first time he had seen her smile in weeks, and it was a smile that didn't just light up her face. It reached into his heart, where the darkness had once been. They stood together in the quiet, the past behind them, and a future waiting to be discovered. Charlie could feel the change, deep in his bones. This was home, not the house, not the door, but the bond they had forged. Days turned to weeks, and weeks turned to months, but Charlie never wavered in his role. He wasn't just a stray anymore. He was more than that. He was her protector, her guardian, and most of all, her family. Life wasn't perfect. There were still moments of pain, of loss, but they faced them together. The girl was no longer a scared, trembling child hiding behind a door. She was growing stronger, more confident, learning how to live again. And Charlie was there for every moment of it. Whether it was comforting her during a difficult night, or just sitting together in the sunlight, soaking in the quiet of the world they had built together, the girl had stopped calling him the stray. Now, she called him Charlie, the name she had given him, and it was a name that carried weight. It was a name that meant something. It meant family. It meant belonging. It meant love. One afternoon, as they sat together on the porch, the girl ran her fingers through Charlie's fur, her eyes sparkling as she whispered, "You saved me." Charlie looked up at her, his eyes calm but full of understanding. He had saved her, yes, but in doing so, he had saved himself too. He had found a purpose, a place in the world. As the wind shifted and the day turned into evening, Charlie and the girl sat together, the fading sunlight painting the sky in hues of amber and rose. There was no fear left in her eyes, no panic, just peace. And for the first time in his life, Charlie realized something. He had always been home, and he was never going to leave. The seasons began to shift again, each day bringing with it a new chapter in the bond that had formed between Charlie and the girl. The small house they lived in felt like a sanctuary now, the walls filled with memories of laughter, healing, and the quiet moments shared between them. Yet, even in this newfound peace, Charlie still felt the stirrings of something deep inside. A reminder of the wild world he had come from, the one he had never truly left behind. There were mornings when the wind would pick up, carrying with it the scent of the forest, of the unknown, and Charlie's eyes would flicker to the horizon. He didn't long for the streets or the endless chase anymore, but there was a pull within him, a connection to something bigger, something primal. The girl noticed it too. She saw the way Charlie would stand at the edge of the yard, staring out at the vast world beyond. It wasn't the same fear she had once seen in him. It was something quieter, something more reflective. One afternoon, she walked up to him, her small hand resting on his back. She was taller now, her movements less hesitant, her voice no longer trembling. She was growing, just as he was. "You miss it, don't you?" she asked, her voice soft but knowing. Charlie turned his head to look at her, his eyes warm but distant. The wild world called to him in ways words couldn't explain. He nuzzled her hand gently, a silent reassurance that no matter where his heart might drift, he was hers. She was his world now, his reason for everything. And yet, that pull, the call of the wild, lingered, whispering in the quiet corners of his mind. A few weeks later, a heavy fog rolled into the town, thick and unyielding, smothering everything in its embrace. The street lamps glowed hazily, the houses shrouded in an eerie silence. The girl had been quieter than usual that day, her eyes often drifting out the window, following the path that led into the woods just beyond the edge of their yard. Charlie could feel it. There was a restlessness in the air, something shifting, something that had been building beneath the surface. That evening, after dinner, she stood by the door again, staring out into the mist. Charlie sat beside her, watching as she stepped closer to the threshold. She wasn't sure what it was that drew her outside. Something deep inside her heart telling her that this was a new beginning, a change that was necessary, a step forward. As she opened the door, the cool air wrapped around them both. Charlie looked at her, his eyes steady, as if to say, "I'm with you always." Without a word, the girl stepped into the fog, and Charlie followed, his paws silent against the damp earth. They didn't know where they were going, but they both felt that something was calling them forward, something beyond the house, beyond the city. For the first time in a long while, Charlie felt the raw pull of adventure. It wasn't the kind of wildness that scared him anymore. It was the kind that beckoned him to find new paths, new opportunities for healing, for growth. They were both seeking something, and Charlie knew that this journey wasn't just for the girl. It was for him too. They walked for hours, the mist thick around them, but they kept moving side by side, two souls tied together by unspoken understanding. As the sky began to darken, they reached a clearing. The world was quiet, save for the soft rustling of the leaves and the distant call of an owl. The girl stopped, breathing in the air. There was something in the silence that felt like home, and for the first time, she realized that the wildness inside Charlie wasn't a danger. It was a part of him that had been waiting for her to embrace it too. With a quiet smile, she reached down and stroked his fur. "This is it, Charlie. This is our new beginning." The journey continued for days, weaving through forests and over hills, as if the land itself was guiding them. And with each step, something shifted within the girl. She had always known Charlie's strength, but now she was learning something else, his resilience. He was more than the dog who had watched over her. He was the embodiment of survival, of nature's harsh beauty, of quiet perseverance. They reached a small, serene lake nestled in the heart of the forest, a place untouched by time, its surface shimmering under the first light of dawn. The girl knelt at its edge, staring at the reflection of the trees, the water as still as her thoughts. Charlie stood beside her, his body relaxed but alert, his eyes scanning the horizon as if this moment held more significance than it appeared. It was here that they finally stopped. The lake wasn't just a stop on their journey. It was the destination. The stillness in the air, the untouched beauty around them, spoke to both of them in a way no words could. The girl dipped her hands into the cool water, feeling its healing touch. And Charlie, his tail wagging ever so gently, stepped forward, joining her. They spent the day by the lake, surrounded by the peaceful silence of the forest. The girl realized that, in this moment, she had found not just healing but a deeper understanding of herself. And Charlie, with every breath he took, seemed to release a little more of the weight he had carried for so long. There was no fear here, no pain, just a quiet connection between them, the land and the water. It was the beginning of something new, and it was perfect. As the days passed by the lake, the girl began to transform. The girl who had once hidden behind closed doors, who had flinched at every loud noise, was becoming someone else. She was growing into the person she had always been, the person Charlie had always believed she could be. One morning, as the sun broke over the trees, casting a golden light on the still waters, Charlie sat beside her, watching the horizon. He had always known this was coming, that they both needed to step into the world, not as victims of their past, but as survivors, as conquerors of their fears. The girl stood up, stretching her arms toward the sky. She was no longer the small, fragile girl she had been. She was stronger, braver, and more confident in herself and in Charlie. The scars of her past were still there, but they no longer defined her. She turned to Charlie, her smile radiant. "Let's go home, boy. We've found everything we needed here." Charlie's heart swelled with something deep and pure. He had always been her protector, but now he was her partner. They had both found something important. Healing, yes, but also the understanding that home wasn't a place. It was a person. And as they walked back together, side by side, the dawn of a new day stretched out before them, vast and full of possibilities. Charlie and the girl had come full circle. They had both found a place in the world, not by clinging to the past, but by embracing the wildness of the future. They had everything they needed, together. Though the girl and Charlie had moved forward, there were still moments when the past whispered through the trees, tracing the edges of their thoughts. They had found peace, yes, but the road to true healing was never as simple as it seemed. The further they ventured from the home they had once known, the more the girl realized the weight of the memories that still lingered. It wasn't just the broken house or the fear that had lived within its walls. It was the grief that clung to her like a second skin, like a shadow she couldn't shake. One night, as the winds began to pick up and the leaves rustled in the growing storm, the girl sat beside the fire, her gaze distant. Charlie lay at her feet, his ears perked, sensing the shift in her mood. His nose nudged her gently, and she looked down at him, her fingers brushing through his fur. "Do you ever wonder if we can outrun the past?" she asked quietly, her voice barely louder than the crackling of the fire. Charlie's eyes met hers, and for a moment, they simply understood each other. The past was something they couldn't outrun, not entirely. But perhaps they could learn to live alongside it, to embrace it as a part of who they had become. The girl leaned forward, her hands trembling slightly as she added more wood to the fire. She wasn't sure if she was trying to keep the memories away or if she was finally ready to face them. Charlie sat up, pressing his side gently against her. She wrapped her arms around him, holding onto the warmth of his body, the comfort he had always provided. And in that moment, she realized that it wasn't about forgetting. It was about accepting. The storm outside grew fiercer, but inside the small camp they had made by the edge of the forest, there was a quiet understanding. They weren't running anymore. They were simply moving forward one step at a time, and that was enough. As the months passed, Charlie and the girl found themselves slowly returning to the world they had once left behind. The forest, with its healing waters and calm isolation, had given them the space they needed to rebuild themselves. But now, there was a longing for something more. The girl had started to notice it in the small things. The way her heart ached when she saw families together. The way she found herself daydreaming about the possibility of a life that didn't feel so fractured. One chilly morning, they made their way back toward the town, the place they had once known so well. It was a hesitant return, the weight of old memories pressing down on them both. But it felt like the right time. They needed to see if the world they had once left behind could be part of their future again. The girl kept her eyes fixed on the road ahead, her fingers gripping Charlie's leash tightly, though she didn't really need it anymore. The bond between them was stronger than any physical tether could ever be. But it was symbolic. It was a gesture of control, of choice. They walked down the familiar street, the place where it had all started. The houses had changed. The neighborhood had grown, but the ghosts of the past still lingered in the corners of her mind. It was only when they reached the park, the same park where she had once played as a child, that the girl stopped. She looked around, her heart racing. And there, just a few yards away, she saw it. Her family. Not the one she had left behind, but the one she had started to create. Her mother was sitting on a bench, the same warm smile on her face as always, holding out her arms to her. Charlie watched as the girl hesitated, her eyes flicking between her mother and the familiar surroundings. She had always been afraid of the past, of what it would mean to face it again. But now, with Charlie beside her, she was different. Stronger. Slowly she took a step forward and then another. And before she knew it, she was in her mother's arms, her heart finally opening up to the love she had once closed herself off from. Charlie sat by her side, his eyes gentle, watching her finally let go of the last remnants of her fear. The past would always be a part of her, but it no longer held the power to define her. And in that moment the girl knew this was what family was. It wasn't about perfection or about erasing the past. It was about acceptance, about coming back together in a new light, one that was filled with the possibility of healing, of rebuilding, of being whole once again. In the days that followed, Charlie and the girl settled into a new rhythm, one that was filled with the quiet hum of normalcy. They found a new home, a small house on the edge of town, where the trees whispered in the wind and the sun peeked through the curtains every morning. It wasn't the grand house of their dreams, but it was theirs, and it was enough. The girl started going to school again, her heart lighter, her step steadier. She had a new circle of friends, a community she could rely on. Charlie, as always, was by her side, loyal and unwavering. He had become not just her protector, but her constant companion, the one thing that had remained unchanged in a world that had always seemed unpredictable. But as the months stretched on, the girl began to see something else in Charlie, a change that mirrored her own. He had stopped looking at the door, at the horizon, as though something were calling him. He had stopped feeling the restlessness in his chest. He had found his place in the world, just as she had found hers. One evening after dinner, the girl and Charlie sat on the porch, the air thick with the scent of the evening dew. The girl smiled softly as she looked at him, her heart full. "You know, Charlie," she said, her voice warm, "I think we've both found what we were looking for." Charlie turned his head, his eyes meeting hers. He licked her hand in response, his tail wagging lightly. And in that moment she knew, no matter where life took them, they would always have each other. They had grown, they had healed, and now they were finally home. Time passed, and the girl grew into a young woman, confident and filled with purpose. She had become everything Charlie had known she could be. The light in the darkness, the strength in the storm. And Charlie, though he had aged and his steps had slowed, was still by her side, still the same loyal companion he had been all those years ago. Together, they built a life. They traveled, they explored, but always returned to the home they had made for themselves. Their love, their bond was unshakable. But one evening, as the sun began to set and the sky turned to hues of purple and orange, Charlie lay by the girl's feet, his breathing shallow, his eyes tired. She looked down at him, her heart heavy with the weight of time. "Charlie," she whispered, her voice breaking with the softness of 1,000 memories. "You're my protector. Always." Charlie lifted his head slightly, his eyes soft, understanding that the time they had together was nearing its end. But there was no fear in his gaze. He had done his job. He had loved, he had protected, and now it was her turn to carry the lessons they had learned together. As the night settled in, the girl sat beside him, her hand resting on his head. She closed her eyes, letting the tears fall, but she didn't feel sadness. She felt gratitude, gratitude for the years they had shared, for the bond that could never be broken. Charlie's tail gave a final, gentle wag as he lay his head down, his eyes closing peacefully. And as the stars began to fill the sky, the girl whispered into the quiet night, "Thank you, Charlie. Thank you for everything." And in the silence, the love they shared lingered eternal. As the years passed, the house on the edge of town became more than just a home. It was a sanctuary, a testament to the journey of two souls who had found each other in the darkest of times. The girl, now a young woman, had blossomed into someone strong and full of light, her spirit unbroken, her heart full of love. And Charlie, though aged and weary, remained by her side, a loyal companion who had never faltered, a reminder of the strength in love and the beauty in healing. On one quiet evening, as the sky softened into hues of lavender and amber, Charlie lay beside her on the porch, his breathing shallow but steady. She sat quietly, her hand resting on his fur, feeling the slow rhythm of his heart. It was in this stillness that she realized the depth of the bond they shared, a bond that went beyond words, beyond time. "Thank you, Charlie," she whispered softly, her voice trembling with love and gratitude. "You gave me everything." Charlie lifted his head slightly, his tired eyes locking with hers. There was no need for words. His gaze spoke volumes. He had always known his purpose, and now, as the world around them stood still, he knew it was time for him to rest. His tail wagged once, gently, before he lay his head back down, at peace. As the stars began to twinkle above, the girl sat in silence, holding on to the memories they had made together. She wasn't alone anymore. In the quiet of the night, she understood that love never truly fades. It lingers, soft and eternal, like the stars in the sky. And so they were home together forever.